Make me sound like some big shot, but actually, I'm just a regular 25-year-old. So I would say that my journey into youth mental health began actually quite late. I feel like these days advocates are like 13, they start when they're like 10 or something like that. But for me, it really began when I had my own personal experience of a mental health challenge. So this was back in my third year of medical school. So I was about 21 at the time. And my mom was unfortunately diagnosed with rectal cancer. And I was also going through a period of adjustment because I was starting my clinical postings. So that entire months after that was a time of great distress for me. So I was very anxious. I felt like my mood was super low, and I didn't know what to do with my feelings because even as a medical student, mental health was not that much of a concept to me. I thought that if I gritted it out, if I tried hard enough, that these emotions would go away and I should be able to be as high functioning as I was used to. But unfortunately, that was not the case. And I found that when I wanted to get help, it was a huge maze. So I went to all these different websites, and then I had such incredible challenges finding a cost effective option for me, a student. And also, I felt immense stigma because I was worried, if I give my number to these people, what will it mean if I want to apply for residency in the future? How will this affect me? So I think all of these challenges, when I finally got out of the pit and I did seek a therapist, I improved. It made me want to change the system, made me want to make a youth mental health system which felt easy to use for every single young person and that all young people should be able to access the help which they need. Yeah, so I think that was what made me decide to take a gap year after the experience, to intern at the Ministry of Health, yeah, to be able to make a change in this area. Oh, this is such a wonderful question. I was actually thinking about it on the way back home today. So I actually just started working at the Institute of Mental Health recently as a medical officer in psychiatry, which has been a long time dream of mine. But actually, back when I was 15 years old, I had thoughts of medicine in mind, but I actually wanted to become a surgeon or even a dermatologist, because I really liked working in my hands and I thought that it would just be a way in which I could help many people. So mental health was actually not a concept to me at that time. So at the time, I was in my third year of school, in National Junior College, and I was dealing with a lot of adjustment issues, which seemed enormous back then, but now, of course, on hindsight, are very small. So I think back then I felt very insecure about questions of purpose. So I didn't know what I was called to. I felt like it was important to be called to something. But then I felt that, my friends knew what they wanted to do, but for myself, I wasn't so sure. Like, sure, I wanted to go to medical school, become a doctor, but was I being, shaped by society, or was I truly, caring for the people which I would like see in the future? Yeah, so at that time, I struggled with things which a lot of young girls today actually do struggle with as well. So things like comparison with their peers. For me, I was very competitive as a student, so I always wanted to be, the best in a particular subject. And I think I also brought that perfectionism into my eating habits. So I think looking back, I struggled with a subclinical eating disorder probably last time. And all these questions of identity, which I think a lot of 15-year-olds face today as well. So I think what would shock my 15-year-old self would probably be that at 25, I was doing something which I'm actually incredibly passionate about and which I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities to, work even on the international stage and going to like the UN and things like that. It would have been a dream for 15-year-old me, I think. And I think it's really a testament to what happens when you go off the traditional route and you really try things like taking a gap year, exploring your interests. Yeah. I realized I should probably have introduced what the Mindline Youth Fellowship actually is to everyone. So, Mindline is a national mental health program, And among one of the branches, there's Youth Mindline. So that's the digital mental health program, which is meant for young people. So the Mindline Youth Mental Health Fellowship is really a advocacy training program. So we want to be able to nurture the next generation of youth mental health advocates for the nation, as well as to build up this existing Youth Mindline product to ensure that it's relevant to young people. So we pick about like 15 people a year, and then we bring them through inspiring talks with different youth mental health leaders in the space, locally as well as internationally. How it began was actually it was really a startup kind of project, I would say. So when I was an intern in my gap year, I think in my second month, then my manager basically said, "Oh, I think we want to start a digital youth mental health program, but we don't really have a product idea in mind. We really want to start from the ground up." Yeah, so we're going to get this consulting firm, and then we're going to do some surveys with young people, co-design workshops. But at the time, I was also reading up about a lot of overseas programs, and I saw that they had this very interesting construct called the Youth Advisory Group. So this was really new to me. I had no idea that youth advisors were a thing because we don't hear about it in the medical space very much. So I thought, oh, maybe we should probably try that for our program because it's shown to have immense results overseas. So I brought it to my managers, and then they said that, oh, okay, sure, Tricia, you can try it, but maybe we can keep it small, just try it out as a very, very tiny project, and then we'll see if it takes off. Yeah, so I kind of recruited the first bunch of 15 people on my own. And it was really, I went to reach out to all the different Telegram channels I knew to get them to, you know, publicize at that time it was the Mindline Youth Advisory Group, youth team. Yeah, so we just gathered a bunch of young people together to co-create what the future of digital mental health could look like for young people in Singapore. Yeah, so there wasn't even a program idea at the start. We just came together to discuss things like, oh, what are the gaps in youth mental health which we see today? If someone gave us the pen and we could design our own product, what would that look like? Yeah, so I think what really made it feel like a mission was when we were looking through Reddit and then we came across like RSG exams. So to the unfamiliar, it was basically a Reddit forum which was meant for young people to share exam answers after national exams. But what was interesting was that we found that there were actually daily comment threads, not about exam answers, but about the most everyday life concerns. So someone would share about their distress over a breakup they had, or they would share about like the stress after the GP paper, and then a bunch of young people would come on to say like, hey, it's okay. And then of course you do get young people who are like, it do be like that sometimes. Yeah, but what we saw was really a vacuum that young people, they didn't have a space to share their emotions safely. So they were going on to this exam answer forum to share their concerns, to share their life, to share a piece of themselves. Yeah, and we really wanted, and although the comments were supportive, but obviously they were not, there wasn't really a clinician on board. There wasn't someone who was trained in actual youth mental issues. So I recall that there was one person who actually said he had thoughts about jumping off on the forum. Yeah, so, and this was all flying under the radar of the government at the time, clinicians. Yeah, so we really wanted to take what was good about that RSG exams forum and translate it into a really safe, supportive environment which young people could share their concerns from. So I think that was when we all really felt, empowered by that revelation. So I remember there was one night where we stayed up until like I think 11 p.m. discussing what this particular forum, it didn't even have a name at that time, could look like. Yeah, so we had a huge mural board and we put up a lot of stickies like, oh, maybe we'll have community builders, peer supporters, how should it be anonymous, how should we structure the forum, and then we would take like these findings to the main team who was working on the product to share like the youth input. Yeah, so I think that was really when it became something of a calling, something which held like much deeper purpose, yeah, to us. Thanks, Brian. I think that was such a good question. Because so often I guess people who are already interested in youth mental health, we kind of assume that, youth mental health is important because we see it a lot in the news. And I think a lot of times people say as a cursory statement, like, yeah, youth mental health is important. But the next question is, so what, right? That really reflects where our priorities are. So I think the blind spot isn't about understanding youth mental health, but the blind spot is youth themselves, their importance, and what they bring to the table. Yeah, so that sounds confusing, so I'll break it down a little bit. Yeah, so a lot of times in youth mental health, we think about how we can help the young person in front of us. Yeah, so they're almost a passive person there coming to receive all the different kinds of support. But a lot of time we miss out on the power young people can bring when we involve them in co-designing the different programs which they're going to be impacted by. Yeah, so I think something I've learned is that youth partnership is really a critical factor in successful youth mental health programs. And this is not just a sentiment, but it's actually found in global guidelines. So the Origin World Economic Forum guidelines in 2020 for good like youth mental health systems actually lists youth partnership as one of the core pillars of designing systems. And there was a Lancet paper a while back which also described, how can we design effective mental health programs. And there's something called the 4Ls framework, which I've actually found like quite useful to when thinking about framing mental health, which is like those who have lived experience of mental health issues, those who have loved experience, so loved ones of those with mental health conditions, those who have learned about the space, and those who have labored in the field. So those who have learned in the space are like your researchers. Labored would be kind of me now, so psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and the like. But a lot of times, our blind spot is really those lived experience and loved experience categories. Yeah, so how can we know what will help a young person without speaking to that young person themselves? I think we all know this in principle, which is why we often share like surveys when we're trying to design a youth mental health program. I'll ask them after we design the product, like, what do you think this looks like? But meaningful partnership with young people is really about bringing them in from the start and recognizing that lived experience is actually lived expertise. And yeah, you'll be really surprised what young people can bring to the table when you actually give them a seat there. So I think the biggest generational blind spot is really about how we actually fix issues in youth mental health, because I think the debate is waning in terms of whether or not it's an important issue, particularly in Singapore. But the next question is like how we can go about fixing things. And I think there's a big blind spot in terms of partnering with young people in a meaningful manner. Yeah. I think we are kind of in the same generation. But even those in their 20s, for me now, because I work with youth in my church, and then even the 15-year-olds at times are difficult for me to understand. And there's only a 10-year age gap between us, right? Yeah, so I think that it's definitely a big problem. I think today's young people, a lot of them actually have some kind of emotional fluency in a way. They are able to like name things which they feel, but they are illiterate about institutions, like how to go about seeking help. Whereas adults, I guess, who are doing the systems, they kind of have system fluency, but they have emotional amnesia. They've essentially forgotten what it's like to be 17 and afraid to speak up about your mental health challenge. So I think, how we experience a mental health challenge, I think of it as like a filter through which, our world passes through. So it's like the world before the mental illness and sometimes the world which happens after. And a lot of times it's like a dystopian filter. But a lot of times, if you had difficulty sharing that world before, which adults don't have always have insight into, right? Because it's not their world. It's very difficult to describe the change that happens when you enter into this dystopia, which is what mental health issues can feel like sometimes. Yeah, so I think that it's impossible to completely abolish the disconnect, to be honest. Um, but when we take time to empathize, to really like sit in young people's shoes, because for example, as a Singaporean, I'm able to empathize with people from like other countries, people in different contexts, right? When I go to like my ward and I talk to like my patients who obviously have very different backgrounds from me, but I think a lot of time, perhaps there's an assumed understanding of what young people are like, how they experience things, rather than taking each young person as like a new person, right? And really sitting with them to be able to understand their backgrounds. Yeah. Yeah, Brian, when you share about this question, actually, I kept thinking about a real life, like a real person which I had met physically. But to be honest, the what really sticks with me is actually this case which I read about as a medical student. So I remember I was in IMH and I was just actually I did meet the patient, but like once. And it was the consultant speaking to the patient. But essentially it was this guy in his late 20s. He had really poorly controlled schizophrenia. Yeah, so he was like very psychotic. He was talking about like harming his his parents. He was violent at home. I think he was 28 or 29 at the time. But when you dug through his history, you actually found that back when he was 13, he actually voiced to his father that, hey, Dad, I think I'm seeing certain things. Yeah, it's not very normal. I think I'm hearing certain voices. That's not very normal. And schizophrenia is a very sad disease because it's something which completely, for a lot of patients, I see that it destroys something we call insight. So that means your awareness that you have a mental health condition, essentially. So this 13-year-old boy actually had early awareness that he was experiencing something that was not quite normal. But what I saw in the notes was that the father said that, oh, no, mental health conditions are not real, essentially, and said, no, you're not going to see a psychiatrist again. And then obviously he came in much later through the years when he was like 21, 22, and then back to when he was 28 and obviously like very severe. So I can only imagine what this young person felt as a 13-year-old who was scared and afraid and who had something which I now know is like early signs of possible schizophrenia. And actually we see that for a lot of these young people with early manifestations of these mental health conditions, if we treat them early, their prognosis is actually much, much better. Yeah, so there's a often quoted statistic that actually 50% of mental health problems show up by the time someone is age 14, and 75% will show up by the time they are age 24. And this is shown globally in the Global Burden of Disease study. Yeah, so it's just very sad when there's this, um, cultural barrier towards seeking help. It's definitely a lot better now, but the effect can be crippling, especially when I see it like, more than a decade down the line where this person could have been treated much earlier with medicines now has to be jabbed repeatedly with the medications which will hopefully make him a little bit better in the future. Yeah. Actually, I have been wondering about this question quite a bit because I watched this Netflix show called Adolescence. I don't know if you watched it as well. Yeah, but like everyone was talking about it. It was all over the UK news. So for uninitiated, I'll explain the plot. So basically, it's this 13-year-old boy called Jamie, and he's arrested on suspicion of murder. Yeah, so it's a really, really wonderful show. I would recommend everyone to watch it if you haven't already. But essentially, we dive into kind of the psyche of a 13-year-old, and then slowly, without revealing too much, we witness the impact of social media on shaping what we later find to be the truth of his crime. We find that he was essentially radicalized by something which is called like the manosphere. So a 13-year-old was often alone in his room. He had this computer, and then he was listening to all these like possibly like podcasts about um, things about how do I explain the manosphere? Okay, essentially it's a gateway to radicalization in certain online communities, and they promote misogynistic and violent ideologies. Yeah, so this eventually led him to commit a violent act against his female classmate. So this incited a lot of debate in the UK because they were calling for things like a social media ban, because obviously it's very, very dangerous if we see episodes like that in real life. Yeah, so actually, social media bans are a growing conversation globally. So Australia recently enacted legislation to do it for those under 16, and Norway and France are doing it as well. Yeah, so I think social media is essentially like the world which we grew up in. today, right? So today's young people, they kind of live on TikTok, Instagram, and the thing is that a lot of these a lot of times like algorithms kind of curate not exactly what is good for the young person, but things which they want to see. Yeah, their currency is attention. So they like kind of share whatever is able to grab attention. And there's actually been very deadly things which have happened because of this incentive structure. So there was the blackout challenge where there's a like young people were encouraged to do self asphyxiation, and it took the life of this 10-year-old girl. And I think um, also, like when we kind of see the world of social media with our friends sharing like their highlight reels, kind of prompts a lot of comparison as well. So I remember back when I was a young person, Instagram was kind of like just beginning. And a lot of times at that time I was like in dance. Yeah. So we would my friends would post all these pictures of them doing all the different dance tricks. I remember I felt really like sucked into comparison because I would kind of compare my ability to do those versus theirs. And for young girls especially, there's a lot of impact on body image because there's a lot of like Photoshop images of the media. And when that's something which is kind of flooding into your brain every day, it subconsciously shapes your vision of what the world should be. Yeah, so I think social media is a very complex conversation to be had, and I don't recommend like a blanket ban of social media. Don't think it'll work in Singapore, but I think what parents need is education on how to share responsible use of social media to their kids, as well as in schools to have like sort of social media literacy, not just against like misinformation, but on the harms of it and how to really use social media as a tool for good, right? Yeah. So because social media can also be a tool in which young people are able to find useful information about how to seek out mental health support, or even they might even meet youth mental health advocates who are sharing about different mental health conditions they are facing and feel encouraged to take the first step. There's also the issue of misinformation online about mental health specifically. So I think TikTok is unfortunately, is a huge purveyor of that. So you get young people who are self-diagnosing themselves with ADHD and then getting their medications on their own. Um, yeah, so I think what's important is to use like a vaccination analogy, is to kind of like pre-inoculate them with what is actually true and factual about mental health facts. So I think in Singapore, we're kind of doing that through the education system. Has a mental health curriculum in place and is continuing to develop what that should look like. Yeah. Yeah, so actually, I have read quite a bit about this, unfortunately, but it has not exactly been translated into action. I'm not sure if you heard of Digital Minimalism. It's a book by Cal Newport. So it's this concept that basically we are digitally distracted all the time and we are on a dopamine high from all the different likes and like the scrolling of TikTok. So he advocates that it's beneficial to that like less can be more, and that we can kind of live alongside digital devices without removing them completely. Yeah, so I have not gone on a digital detox personally, and I think I haven't read enough to really comment on their clinical effectiveness. But I have had friends who have gone on silent retreats where they completely like put away their phone, any contact with the outside world. And when they share anecdotally that they have come back feeling much more centered, even though initially it was difficult. Yeah, so I think I can't comment on whether a hard like detox will work, but I think that we would all benefit from digital minimalism, which is learning how to pare down the impact of our phones on our lives, and kind of recalibrate our dopamine system. So I think one of the things which I have found helpful is disabling notifications on my phone to different kinds of apps. So sometimes they'll auto set that the notifications are allowed for all your applications, so it'll just like pop up randomly, maybe when you're reading like a really interesting article or book, or when you're like working out. but you can actually set the notifications which you want to see like pop up. And I think that has helped immensely in terms of maintaining like my own mental health. So I think we kind of are trying to do it. So I think COVID, in Singapore's context, like COVID really woke us up. And then we had that whole interagency task force. And now we have a national mental health office in Singapore, actually, which is all very, very exciting. Yeah, so I think we Singapore is actually, I would say, a step ahead of some other countries, like not to put comparisons in place, but we're in a situation where we're privileged to be able to invest in mental health, right? The government has the funding to be able to hire people who are able to investigate how we can fix this gap in the first place. Whereas some other countries, they don't have that luxury. The people who are in charge of mental health are also looking at a bunch of other non-communicable diseases. And I have some friends in like Laos, Philippines, different countries who have shared like difficulties sharing about even why youth mental health is important to their governments. So I would say that in Singapore, we're actually privileged in that way. I think what would be most impactful to bridge the youth adult gap in mental health would be what I shared earlier about youth partnership. And youth partnership is really about giving young people not just a say in how programs should be run, but really giving them the pen, the paper, giving them a seat at the table, meaningfully co-creating with them. That means involving them like from the start of the process. When you see a problem, let's say there are like long waiting times, maybe to see a psychologist, you involve a young person right from the get-go, right? Um, Perhaps you could involve them like as a co-researcher to be able to do a lit review on the different factors impacting that, or you could do get them to kind of imagine and brainstorm ways in which we can fix the problem, or really even like hearing from the young people who have been through the systems themselves. So I think what we need is infrastructure to facilitate youth partnership, because right now, for those who have accepted that it is important, it seems still like a pie in the sky ideal, because we haven't seen a ton of um, examples of youth partnership, particularly in the Asian context. In comparison, it's very common in other Western countries. So it's actually considered a common practice to have something called a youth advisory group, where it's a group of young people who are given almost an equal say in terms of how different programs will turn out. Yeah, so I've even heard in the US they have this program called Alcove. It's a youth mental health program which is run by Stanford. I remember the head, Dr. Steven, like he told me that if the young person on the interview panel says that they don't like the front desk staff, like they will not take the front desk staff they're interviewing. So that was like really interesting to me, that kind of importance and emphasis they place on the youth voice. So I think we need to shift from having youth partnership just be an idea even, but to make it a policy itself, right? And a best bet one that saves lives. Because we've seen in the literature, it's published in a lot of research papers, that successful international programs that have been going on since the 2000s, programs like Headspace in Australia, Alcove in the US, Jigsaw in Ireland, a lot of these were successful precisely because they partnered with young people in meaningful ways. So from the beginning, they had a youth advisory group, and then they also involved youth in the co-design of the product. And then they would continually get input from the youth advisors, even after the product was launched, about how they could improve things. Yeah, so I think in Singapore, a very easy way to start with youth partnership for those who aren't used to it is just really setting up a youth advisory group. So recruiting a bunch of people, young people who are passionate about a topic, and are diverse, and who are able to just share maybe like once a month even about things which you can fix about the program which you're hoping to run. I think I'm something of a dreamer, so I like to always think of the best case scenario, and sometimes even um, like moon shoots, so things which should seem like so crazy but can actually come true, I think. So, for instance, things like polio, right? I mean, it once was an immense public health problem, but today we are close to seeing like zero polio cases in a lot of different countries, and this was this happened because like we came out of like the polio vaccine, and we managed to achieve things which once seemed impossible. And I feel that the same can and should be true about youth mental health problems. Yeah, so I wrote a vision a while back, which I'm just gonna share bits of. Yeah, so I wrote that, I dream of a world where young people are able to grow up safely without harm. They're able to access education without fear of mental health challenges. And even if they do face challenges along the way, it's as destigmatized as like falling down and having a cut and needing to go to the doctors to get a band-aid. I wrote that, I dream of a Singapore where there are zero suicide rates and zero rates of psychiatric complications. I dream of a vaccine even for mental illness, and where young people can be bold to pursue the things which are on their hearts, where development is like safe, where we know of where public health people know about best practices, they know how to raise children well. Parents feel safe as well. They feel empowered to help with their children's mental health. Um, the truth is that in public health, we always talk about how can we go upstream in fixing the problem. So if the problem is cancer, how can we improve screening? How can we reduce the risks which perpetuate the cancer in the first place? And the same is true for public health, for mental health, right? We think about, oh, what are the risk factors for mental health conditions? How can we fix things down the line? But investing in our young people, investing in children, even, is actually the best form of public health, right? Because you're literally going upstream in terms of the age range. We'll fix things which could have been fixed early on. So, for example, that 13-year-old boy who had early signs of psychosis, maybe if he had received treatment earlier on, he wouldn't have landed up back at IMH when he was in his late 20s. Not that there's anything wrong with going to IMH, but that it really ripped away years of his life, which could have been spent fruitfully studying something he was passionate about, right? The future of Singapore rests in the next generation and how well that next generation does. We talk a lot about education, things like that. But once you have a mental health challenge, it really affects every single domain of your life. Yeah, so I think it's critical for us to invest in youth mental health because it's really a force multiplier. Even things like economic growth, future health, and really like the future of Singapore. Yeah, I was thinking whether I should kind of write a new poem for this or whether I should read one of my old poems. And I think I tried to like write a poem which was like you kind of prescribed for me, right? Like how can you convince someone? But I think the truth is that people are not convinced through advice, they're often convinced through stories. So I thought I would share the last poem in patient history actually. And it was really how I felt when I found healing at the end of the tunnel, like a light at the end of the tunnel. To be honest, even after the book was published, my mom, I mean, she still has cancer now and she's still battling it in the final phases, like, unfortunately. It's more palliative in nature, the care now. But I often come back to this poem to remind myself of what it means to heal and to be at rest, even when the world around you seems unrestful. Yeah, so the poem is called River Life. Yeah. I allow grace to fold into every ridge. In this month of new beginnings, I open my palms for the fish-eyed wonder of a year, marvel at the manna peeling like schools of minnow into river life. Everything is quiet at a ledge. All the days so brimmed with beauty, waves brining shore. We sing like the dolphins spinning into dusk, praising the only way they know how, all lifted fins swimming in dark. Pressing the psalms we etch in the sand, I let love sleep over every dry ache. I ask for mercy's new come morning. At dawn, I know before anything what follows. Um, yeah, that's the end of the poem. But actually, I had another line which I included originally. I'm just going to read it because I really like the line. It says, I look to light and I live in light immediate. I think a lot of times when we are in mental health challenges, we're kind of mired in the pit, right? We're always looking down, we're looking at our knees, we're looking at our problems at the bottom of the well. But the truth is, I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, there's always some kind of light wherever you are. Sometimes that's a person who cares about you. Maybe it's a kind remark by a stranger. Maybe it's like a nice flower which you came across when you're walking home and you're feeling sad. But there's always some kind of light which we can hold on to. And I think when we hold on to that light, we focus on that light in our life. For some people, it's religion. For some people, it's a family member. For some, it's like purpose which drives them. There's always life in that. And there's always life to be worth having had. Yeah, and there's always a life like worth living. And the earlier you seek help, like the better you feel, honestly. Yeah. So I would encourage anyone who's like listening and debating whether or not they should see the therapist to really just take the first step. Yeah, because what you'll gain is so much greater than what you have to lose. Yeah.